Widowed black moms-in-laws stole everything from her and the twins. Next day the lawyer drove her to a hidden estate. $0. That's it. Not a penny. Not a dime. Just a piece of paper with the number 0 staring back at me like a slap across the face. I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine losing the love of your life. Imagine sitting in a room full of his family members, people who are supposed to care about you and your children, and hearing this. Perhaps this will teach you that breeding with the help doesn't guarantee a payday. That's what my mother-in-law said to me, to my face, in front of my 6-year-old daughter and my 8-year-old son. Those words came out of Cordelia Monroe's mouth like venom, deliberate and cold, designed to destroy what little dignity I had left. 23 people sat around that conference table. 23 members of the Monroe family in their designer suits and their expensive jewelry, watching me like I was entertainment, like my pain was something they could enjoy with their morning coffee. My husband had been dead for 4 months, 4 months of grief, so heavy I could barely breathe. 4 months of trying to explain to 2 children why their daddy wasn't coming home. 4 months of wondering how I was going to survive without him. And these people, his family, left me with nothing. But here's what they didn't know. Here's what Cordelia Monroe and her son Preston and every single person in that room didn't see coming. 24 hours later, a lawyer showed up at my door at 9:47 at night. A man I'd never met before. A man who carried an envelope that would change everything. A man who would drive me to a place my husband had been building in secret for 2 years. A hidden estate. A sanctuary. A fortress of love that Julian Monroe had constructed knowing that his family would try to destroy me the moment he was gone. This is the story of how a family tried to erase a black mother and her twins from existence. This is the story of how they stole everything, lied about everything, and thought they'd gotten away with it. And this is the story of how I fought back. If you've ever felt powerless against people who thought they were untouchable, I need you to do something for me right now. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Or just say I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline, because we're about to go on a journey together. A journey about justice, about love that persists past death, and about discovering that sometimes the people who leave you with nothing actually leave you with everything. Hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends. My name is Khalida Monroe. My friends call me Kali, and this is the day my world ended and began again in the same breath. The conference room on the 14th floor of Morrison & Associates smelled like old money and new leather. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city where I'd once worked as a waitress, where Julian had found me, where we'd built a life that his family never accepted. I sat in a chair that was too big for me, feeling small and out of place in a black dress I'd worn to my husband's funeral. The same funeral most of these people hadn't bothered to attend. My children sat on either side of me, Amara's small hand gripping mine so tight her fingernails dug crescents into my palm. Elijah sat rigid as stone, his 8-year-old face trying so hard to be brave. They wore their Sunday best, the nice clothes I'd scrubbed by hand in our apartment's cramped bathroom sink because the laundry machines in our building had eaten my last quarters 3 days ago. Amara's dress had a small stain on the hem that I couldn't get out no matter how hard I tried. Elijah's collar was slightly frayed. The Monroe family, meanwhile, looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Cordelia Monroe sat at the head of the table in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my rent. Her silver hair was styled in a perfect chignon. Her jewelry caught the light every time she moved, diamonds and pearls that had been in the family for generations. Preston Monroe, Julian's older brother, lounged in his chair like he owned the world. And maybe he did. Certainly he thought he owned this moment, watching me with barely concealed satisfaction. Around the table sat aunts, uncles, cousins, second cousins, people I'd met at obligatory family gatherings where I'd been tolerated but never welcomed, people who'd made comments about my background, my education, my skin color, always just subtle enough to maintain deniability. The family attorney, a thin man named Garrett Morrison, cleared his throat. He had a folder in front of him thick with documents. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. "We're here for the reading of Julian Anthony Monroe's last will and testament," he began, his voice flat and professional. I'd been dreading this moment for weeks, not because I cared about money, but because I knew what it meant. This was the final severing, the last official connection to the man I'd loved more than breathing. Julian had handled our finances. He'd always told me not to worry, that everything was taken care of, that he'd made sure the kids and I would be safe no matter what happened. I'd trusted him completely. Maybe that was my mistake. Garrett Morrison began reading. His voice droned on with legal language I barely understood. Whereas, and heretofore, and other words that felt designed to obscure rather than clarify. I watched family members perk up as their names were mentioned. To my nephew Preston Monroe, I leave controlling interest in Monroe Financial Holdings. Cheers barely concealed as Preston smiled that shark smile of his. To my sister Priscilla Monroe Whitfield, I leave the summer residence in Martha's Vineyard. Priscilla dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, performing grief she didn't feel. On and on it went. The primary residence, the vacation homes, the art collection, the business interests, all distributed among blood relations who'd never worked a day in their lives, people who'd inherited wealth and acted like they'd earned it. I waited for my name, for Amara and Elijah's names, for some acknowledgement that Julian's wife and children existed. Garrett Morrison reached the final page. He paused, and I saw sweat beading on his forehead despite the frigid air conditioning. And to my wife, Khalida Washington Monroe, and my children, Emma and Lucas Monroe, I leave the sum of $0 to be divided equally between them. The words didn't make sense at first. My brain couldn't process them. $0? That was impossible. Julian had life insurance. He'd told me about it years ago. Showed me the policy. $5 million to make sure we'd be taken care of. I don't understand, I whispered. The conference room erupted, not in shock or sympathy, but in laughter. Actual laughter. Preston threw his head back and guffawed like he'd heard the funniest joke of his life. Cousins I barely knew exchanged gleeful glances. An aunt whose name I couldn't remember whispered loudly to her husband. I knew that girl was just after his money. Mommy? Amara's voice was so small, so confused. Well. Preston's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Looks like dear Richard finally came to his senses about his little gold digger. Richard was Julian's middle name. The family had always called him that, refusing to use the name he actually went by. One more way of asserting ownership, of reminding him he belonged to them. Excuse me? My voice came out stronger than I expected. What about the life insurance? The house? Julian told me everything was in order. Preston leaned forward, elbows on the table, smile wide and cruel. The accident investigation revealed significant financial irregularities. Reckless investments, undisclosed liabilities. My brother, it seems, wasn't the financial genius we believed him to be. That's not true. Julian was meticulous about money. He would never... Perhaps, Cordelia's voice wheezed out like air from a punctured tire. This will teach you that breeding with the help doesn't guarantee a payday. The twins flinched. Amara's grip on my hand tightened until it hurt. Elijah's face crumpled, confusion and hurt warring in his expression. They were too young to fully understand the venom, but old enough to feel its sting. My chest tightened. I'd sat through 47 minutes of this mockery, watching Richard's relatives claim millions while his children, his own flesh and blood, were dismissed as afterthoughts. The family's primary residence, the vacation homes, the art collection, the business interests, all of it distributed among blood relations who'd never worked a day in their lives. $0. I whispered the number again, feeling it burn in my throat like acid. Garrett Morrison wouldn't look at me. He shuffled papers, cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses. Anything to avoid meeting my eyes. Furthermore, Cordelia continued, her cultured voice cutting through the room like a surgical blade, given the circumstances of Julian's death. Don't. My interruption surprised even myself. My voice came out low and dangerous. Don't you dare. Cordelia's expression didn't change. At 73, she'd perfected the art of looking through people rather than at them, especially when those people had dark skin and worked service jobs. My son died driving recklessly because he was distracted. The police report indicates he was on the phone, arguing with someone in the moments before the collision. The implication hung in the air like smoke. I had been that someone. Our last conversation had been about Cordelia's latest cruelty, her refusal to attend Amara's dance recital, because, as she'd so delicately put it, community theater performances aren't really our family's sphere. That accident wasn't, I began, but my throat closed around the words. It had been 4 months. 4 months since the highway patrol officer had appeared at my door, 2:47 in the morning. 4 months since I'd collapsed in the hallway while my children slept, their last memories of their father being his promise to bring them chocolate chip pancakes in the morning. 4 months of grief so profound it felt like drowning while everyone around you breathed air. The estate has been settled according to legal precedent and family trust bylaws, Garrett said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Monroe, you're entitled to nothing from the family holdings. The house Julian purchased was, upon investigation, found to be in significant mortgage arrears. The bank has initiated foreclosure proceedings. That's impossible. Julian handled the finances, but he would never— I stopped, hearing how pathetic I sounded. The wife who didn't know anything about her own household. Clearly, Preston said, his smile razor thin, you didn't know my brother as well as you thought. Perhaps if you'd concerned yourself less with spending his money and more with understanding his business. I was raising our children. My voice cracked like thunder, startling several family members. I was building the home Julian said he wanted, creating the family he said he loved more than anything in this world. Amara began crying, soft hiccuping sobs that broke my heart. Elijah put his arm around his sister with 8-year-old solemnity, his jaw set in a way that reminded me so painfully of Julian that I had to look away. Be that as it may, Cordelia continued, examining her manicured nails with studied indifference. The trust bylaws are quite clear. Family assets remain within bloodline control. You are not blood, Miss Washington. The deliberate use of my maiden name was a knife between the ribs. 7 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of love, all erased by a woman who'd never bothered to learn how I took my coffee. My children are your blood, I said quietly. Amara and Elijah are Julian's legacy. Yes, well, Cordelia's expression suggested she'd tasted something sour. That remains a matter of some family discussion. We're prepared to arrange for appropriate care of the children, should you find yourself unable to provide. You want to take my babies? My voice dropped to something dangerous, something even I didn't recognize. The room went silent. Every person at that table heard the shift, the moment when grief transformed into something far more primal. You people haven't spoken to them in 4 months. You didn't come to Julian's funeral. Cordelia, you didn't even send a card when your son died. And now you want to discuss taking my children? Our grandchildren, Preston corrected, his voice cold, who shouldn't suffer for their father's poor choices. The meaning was crystal clear. I was the poor choice. My children were collateral damage to a marriage the Monroe family had never accepted. You have 30 days to vacate the property, Garrett said quietly, sliding papers across the table toward me. After that, the bank will take possession. I'm sorry, Mrs. Monroe. The apology felt as hollow as my chest, where my heart used to beat before grief had carved it out. I gathered my children with as much dignity as I could manage. Amara was still crying, her small body shaking with sobs she tried to muffle against my side. Elijah held his sister's hand, his face set in that too serious expression he'd worn since his father died. We walked from that conference room with our spines straight and our heads high, but I heard them behind us. Preston's laugh, loud and satisfied. Cordelia's dismissive comment to someone nearby, I give her 2 months before. She comes crawling back, begging us to take the children off her hands. The parking garage was cold and dim, our footsteps echoing off concrete. My 10-year-old Honda waited like a faithful friend, the first gift Julian had ever given me, back when we were dating and he'd noticed I took 2 buses to reach the restaurant where I waitressed. I got the children buckled into the back seat before I allowed myself to brake. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Tears I'd been holding back for 47 minutes for 4 months, for 7 years of being treated like I wasn't good enough, finally broke free. Mama? Amara's small voice drifted from the back seat. Are we going to be okay? I looked at her in the rearview mirror, at her big brown eyes that were so much like Julian's, at her brother sitting beside her with protective solemnity, trying to be the man of the house at 8 years old. Yes, baby, I whispered. I promise. It was a promise I had no idea how to keep. To understand what that promise meant, to understand what the Monroe family tried to destroy, I need to take you back to 6 years before that terrible conference room. Back to a Tuesday night in spring when my entire life changed because a man walked into a diner and ordered coffee. I'd been working at Magnolia Street Diner for 3 years. Double shifts most days, whatever hours I could get. The pay was terrible and the customers were worse, but it was what I could manage. My shoes were held together with duct tape and determination. My uniform was too big because I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, skipping meals so I could save money for a future that felt impossibly far away. It was 6:47 on a Tuesday evening when Julian Monroe walked through that door. I noticed him immediately because he was different, tall, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that reached all the way to his soul. He wore an expensive suit that looked out of place among our cracked vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights. He slid into the corner booth in my section, and when I approached with my order pad and my tired waitress smile, he looked up at me like I was something worth seeing. "Coffee, please," he said. His voice was gentle, educated. "And whatever you recommend. I'm new to the neighborhood." Most customers didn't ask for recommendations. They ordered without looking at me, treating me like furniture that occasionally brought food. "The meatloaf special," I told him. "It's Tuesday, which means Cook actually makes it with love instead of obligation." He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his whole face. "Then I definitely want that." His name was Julian, though I wouldn't learn that until later. He came back the next Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that. 6 weeks of Tuesday visits, always ordering coffee and whatever I recommended. Always. Leaving tips that were far too generous for a plate of meatloaf and some conversation. On the 7th Tuesday, he asked me out. "I know this is probably against some rule," he stammered, suddenly boyish and nervous, despite his expensive suit. "But would you maybe want to have coffee with me sometime? Somewhere you're not working, I mean. Somewhere you can actually sit down." I should have said no. Should have recognized that men like him didn't date women like me without expecting something in return. Should have protected myself from the inevitable hurt. But his eyes were kind, and he'd never once looked at me the way most men did, like I was there for decoration or convenience. He looked at me like I was a revelation. "Okay," I said. "Yes, coffee." Our first date lasted 9 hours. Coffee became lunch, became a walk through Riverside Park, became dinner, became sitting on a bench sharing dreams while streetlights flickered on around us. "I work in finance," Julian admitted as we watched the sun set over the city. "Family business. It's complicated. My mother has very specific ideas about who I should be, what I should do, who I should date. And what do you want?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked, and said, "This, you, whatever this could become." 6 months later, he proposed with his grandmother's ring, the only Monroe heirloom his mother couldn't control. He got down on one knee in that same park, on that same bench where we'd shared our first conversation beyond coffee and meatloaf. "My family won't make this easy," he warned me, the ring box open between us. "My mother is difficult. She has ideas about bloodlines and legacy and who's worthy of the Monroe name. But Collie, I've never been more sure of anything. You're my everything. You're the life I want to build." I said yes because I loved him, because he saw me as more than a waitress with duct-taped shoes. Because when he looked at me, I felt like I mattered. The wedding was small, intimate, held at Riverside Park on a Saturday morning in October. My mother came up from Atlanta, proud and crying happy tears. My 2 best friends from the diner stood beside me, and Julian stood at the altar looking at me like I was his whole world. Cordelia Monroe attended. She wore black to her son's wedding and refused to smile in any of the photographs. She stood in the back during the ceremony, her face carved from ice, watching her son commit what she clearly considered an unforgivable sin. Preston made pointed comments about prenuptial agreements, loudly, multiple times, in front of anyone who would listen. But Julian had already insisted I sign a prenup, not to protect his family's interests, but to protect mine. He'd written it himself with his own attorney, making sure that if anything happened to our marriage, I'd be taken care of. "You're not marrying me for money," he'd said when he showed me the documents. "I know that, but I want you to know that choosing me doesn't mean giving up your security. This protects you, Collie, not them." The rest of the Monroe family sent expensive gifts and cheap excuses. Too busy to attend. Prior commitments. Unavoidable conflicts. Julian had defended me. Always. When Cordelia suggested I was common, Julian responded that I was extraordinary. When Preston implied I was a gold digger, Julian had shown his brother the prenup that actually protected my interests. "You were never family," Preston had sneered at the reception, drunk on expensive champagne at 3 in the afternoon. "You were a convenience Richard picked up when he was feeling charitable." And Julian had stepped between us, his voice carrying that quiet authority he usually kept hidden. "Her name is Collie. She's my wife. And if you can't show her basic respect, you can leave my wedding." Preston had left. So had half the Monroe contingent. The wedding photos showed our small, loving gathering, empty chairs where family should have been. But Julian hadn't cared. He'd danced with me under string lights while a guitarist played our song. He'd whispered promises against my hair about the life we'd build together. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me," he said as we swayed together. "I don't care what they think. I don't care what they say. You're my family now. You and whatever babies we make together." We made Elijah first. Julian was there for every doctor's appointment, his hand holding mine through every ultrasound. He read every pregnancy book he could find, asking questions that made the obstetrician laugh. Is it normal for her to cry at commercials? What about pickles with ice cream? Should I be worried that she's reorganizing the kitchen at 2 in the morning? When Elijah was born, Julian cried harder than I did. He held our son with shaking hands, this tiny perfect being that was half him and half me, and whispered, "Hi, buddy. I'm your dad. I'm going to love you forever." 2 years later came Amara. Julian had been hoping for a girl. He'd bought pink paint and fairy tale books and a dress with ruffles that our daughter would wear exactly once before declaring it too itchy. He'd installed a tire swing in our backyard before she was even born, imagining her growing up pushing toward the sky. He'd changed diapers at 3 in the morning, sung lullabies in his terrible off-key voice, built blanket forts with engineering precision that always collapsed within minutes, sending kids into fits of giggles. He'd made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs on Saturday mornings, attended every parent-teacher conference, every dance recital, every science fair. He'd helped Amara learn to read and taught Elijah about constellations and treated our children like they were the most important people in the universe, because to him, they were. Julian had built us a life, a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools, family vacations to the beach every summer, dance classes for Amara and science camp for Elijah. He'd made me believe that love could conquer the weight of old money and older prejudices. I didn't learn until years later about the trust fund Cordelia had threatened to revoke if Julian didn't reconsider his options. I didn't know about the family meetings where Preston had suggested an annulment could be arranged quietly and profitably. Julian had simply loved me louder than his family hated me. He'd shielded me from the worst of their cruelty, made excuses for why we couldn't attend certain family gatherings, suggested we spend holidays with my mother in Atlanta instead of at the Monroe estate, created a bubble where our little family could be happy and safe. I thought it was us choosing our own path. I didn't realize it was Julian protecting us from attacks I couldn't see. 2 years before he died, things started changing. Julian became preoccupied, distracted. He'd spend hours on his laptop after the kids went to bed, working on projects he said were just portfolio reorganization. He met with lawyers I'd never heard of, made phone calls in his car that he said were just boring business stuff. "Are you okay?" I'd asked him one night, finding him in his study at 2 in the morning. He'd pulled me into his lap, held me close, kissed my forehead with desperate tenderness. "I'm making sure you're always taken care of. That's all. Just preparing for the future." "What future?" "The one where I'm old and gray and watching our grandchildren play in the yard we haven't bought yet. The one where you write your novel and I build you a library to write it in. The one where we prove that love is stronger than money, than family pressure, than everything that tried to keep us apart." 3 months before he died, Julian drove to the office to handle an emergency. It was a Tuesday night. Always a Tuesday, like some cosmic joke written by a cruel universe. He called from the car, his voice tight with frustration. "My mother's trying to force me out of the company," he said. I could hear the anger underneath his careful control. "Says I'm not committed to family interests anymore. Preston's backing her play." I was washing dishes while the children did homework at the kitchen table. Amara was drawing flowers in the margins of her spelling worksheet. Elijah was building a model of the solar system out of styrofoam balls. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "Tell her that you and the kids are my family interests, that everything I do for you 3, that if she wants to disown me, she can get in line behind every other person who thought I'd choose their expectations over my own happiness." Those were the last words he ever said to me. 3 minutes later, a semi-truck ran a red light at the intersection of Highway 47 and Morrison Boulevard. The driver claimed he didn't see Julian's car. The police report said Julian had been distracted, on his phone, arguing with someone. The Monroe family had implied he'd been arguing with me, fighting with his difficult wife about money or family or whatever convenient excuse made their narrative work. The truth was that he'd been defending our marriage one final time. defending me, defending the life we'd built, defending our children's right to be loved without condition. Julian Monroe died on impact, the phone still in his hand, my name still on his lips. The highway patrol officer who came to our door at 2:47 in the morning was young, clearly uncomfortable with the task he'd been given. "Ma'am, there's been an accident. Your husband," he paused, unable to say the words. I knew anyway. Some part of me had known the moment I heard the knock, some deep animal instinct that recognized the sound of your world ending. I'd collapsed in the hallway, just fell like a puppet with cut strings. The officer had caught me, lowered me gently to the floor while I made sounds I didn't recognize as coming from my own throat. "Mama?" Elijah had appeared in his pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Behind him, Amara clutched her stuffed elephant, the one Julian had won for her at the state fair. "Is Daddy okay? How do you tell an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old that their father is never coming home? How do you explain that the man who'd promised chocolate chip pancakes in the morning would never make another breakfast?" I'd pulled them both onto my lap right there in the hallway, held them, while the officer stood awkwardly nearby, and told them the truth. Daddy was in an accident, a very bad accident. And he died, babies. He's not coming home. Amara hadn't understood at first, but Daddy promised pancakes. Elijah had gone very still, very quiet. Then he'd asked, in a voice far too adult for his age, was it because of Grandma Cordelia? Because she was being mean again? The question had broken something in me, that my 8-year-old son immediately understood his grandmother's cruelty, that he'd connected it to his father's death, that he was already learning the world could be vicious. No, baby, I'd lied. It was just an accident, just a terrible, terrible accident. The funeral had been 4 days later. I'd called Cordelia to inform her of the arrangements. She'd been silent for a long moment, then said, "I see. We'll handle the services ourselves, of course. You needn't concern yourself. These are my arrangements," I'd said, finding strength I didn't know I had. "For my husband. You can attend or not, but this is how we're saying goodbye." Cordelia had hung up without another word. Julian's family hadn't come. Not to the funeral, not to the burial, not to the reception afterward at our house where friends and neighbors brought casseroles and condolences. The only acknowledgement I'd received was a massive flower arrangement delivered to the funeral home with a card that read, "In memory of Richard Monroe, from the Monroe family." They'd gotten his name wrong. Their own son, their own brother, and they'd called him by the name he never used, the identity they'd tried to force on him. I'd thrown the flowers away. The 4 months after Julian's death were a special kind of hell. Bills started arriving that I didn't understand. Mortgage payments Julian had supposedly missed, though that was impossible. He'd been meticulous about the house payment. Utilities threatened disconnection. Credit card companies called about balances I didn't know existed. The life insurance policy Julian had shown me years ago, the $5 million safety net he'd promised would always protect us, didn't exist. When I called the insurance company, they had no record of it. No record of Julian Monroe at all. My savings, the small account Julian had helped me maintain just in case, evaporated within weeks. The funeral the Monroe family hadn't attended, but I'd had to pay for anyway. Utility bills for a house I was apparently about to lose. Food, clothes, the basic dignities of keeping my children fed and clean and safe. I applied for 37 jobs in 23 days. Restaurants wanted younger girls without family obligations. Offices wanted recent experience, not someone with a 7-year gap where she'd been a full-time mother. Retail wanted flexible schedules I couldn't offer with 2 children to pick up from school. Everyone wanted something I couldn't provide. I sold our furniture to a second-hand dealer for a fraction of its worth. The couch where Julian and I had watched movies after the kids went to bed. The dining table where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays. The beautiful oak bed frame he'd surprised me with on our 3rd anniversary. All of it gone for pennies on the dollar, desperate money to buy a few more weeks before the inevitable. Neighbors watched with pitying eyes. Mrs. Chen from next door brought over meals she claimed were extras, though I knew she was making them specifically for us. She'd hug me in her kitchen whispering, "You'll get through this, honey. You're stronger than you know." But I didn't feel strong. I felt like I was drowning, going under for the 3rd time while my children watched from the shore. Elijah started having nightmares. He'd wake up screaming for his daddy, and I'd hold him while he cried, this 8-year-old boy who was trying so hard to be brave. Why did Daddy leave us? he asked one night, his face buried against my shoulder. He didn't leave us, baby. He died. That's different. He would never have chosen to leave you. But we're going to lose our house. We're going to have nowhere to live. How is that different from leaving? I had no answer for that. Amara stopped talking about her daddy. Just stopped mentioning him entirely, like if she didn't say his name out loud, it wouldn't be real. She threw herself into drawing, creating elaborate pictures of gardens and fairies and magical places where nothing bad ever happened. Sometimes I'd find her standing in front of Julian's picture on the mantel, just staring at it with her thumb in her mouth. A habit she'd broken a year ago but had returned to under the weight of grief. "Mama," she asked once, "do you think Daddy can see us from heaven?" "I think so, sweetheart." "Then why doesn't he come back? If he can see us, he knows we need him. Why doesn't he come back?" What do you say to that? How do you explain death to a 6-year-old who just wants her daddy to tuck her in at night? The eviction notice arrived 28 days after that terrible will reading. A sheriff's deputy brought it to the door, looking genuinely apologetic. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, watching me read the paperwork with numb disbelief. "You've got 48 hours to remove your possessions. After that, anything left becomes property of the bank. 48 hours to pack up 7 years of marriage. 48 hours to box up 2 children's entire lives. 48 hours to erase every memory of the man I'd loved more than breathing." I started with the children's rooms. Elijah helped with quiet efficiency, this 8-year-old who'd become the man of the house by default and disaster. He carefully packed his rock collection, each stone labeled with where he and Julian had found it. His books about space and engineering, the model rockets they'd been planning to launch before everything fell apart. "Mama," he asked while wrapping up his telescope, "where are we going to go?" "I don't know yet, baby, but we'll figure it out together." "What if we can't figure it out? What if we end up like those people Daddy used to give money to downtown, the ones sleeping on benches?" "We won't," I said with false confidence. "I promise we won't." But I wasn't sure I believed it. Amara's room was harder. Every toy, every drawing, every piece of clothing carried memories I wasn't ready to let go. The fairy costume Julian had bought for Halloween. The ballet shoes, from her first recital that he'd attended with a bouquet of roses bigger than her head. The bedtime story collection he'd read from every single night. "Can we bring everything?" she asked, watching me sort through her stuffed animals. "We can bring your favorites, sweetheart. But we need to travel light for a while." "Why?" "Because sometimes life gets complicated, and we have to make hard choices." "I don't like hard choices." "Me neither, baby. Me neither." On the final night before eviction, I sat in our empty living room where Julian had proposed building me a reading nook, where we decorated Christmas trees and celebrated birthdays and made love on the couch after the children had gone to bed. The furniture was gone, sold or donated or thrown away. The walls bore pale rectangles where family photographs had hung. Amara and Elijah slept in sleeping bags borrowed from Mrs. Chin. Tomorrow, we'd move into a motel room I'd secured for 1 week at a discount rate the manager had offered when I explained our situation. After that week, I had no idea where we'd go. A shelter, maybe. If they had space. If they accepted families. If I could swallow enough pride to admit I'd failed at the one job that mattered, protecting my children. The knock on the door at 9:47 startled me so badly I nearly screamed. Through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize. Tall, dark-haired, wearing an expensive suit despite the late hour. He looked like money and trouble, and I'd had enough of both. "Mrs. Monroe?" His voice carried through the door, warm and professional. "My name is Bennett Crawford. I was your husband's personal attorney. I need to speak with you urgently." "Personal attorney?" Julian had never mentioned anyone named Bennett Crawford. The Monroe family had their legion of legal sharks, but this man looked different, felt different. "If you're here to serve more papers," I called through the door, "I've already been evicted." "You're too late. I'm not here to serve papers. I'm here to fulfill a promise I made to Julian 3 months before he died." "May I come in?" 3 months before he died, when Julian had been preoccupied and distracted, when he'd been making late-night phone calls and meeting with lawyers I'd never heard of, when he'd known something was wrong, when he'd felt his family circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. I opened the door, keeping the chain engaged. The man, Bennett Crawford, stood in the hallway with a briefcase in one hand and an expression that carried something I couldn't quite name. Determination, maybe, or sadness, or both. I have information about your husband's estate that wasn't disclosed at the will reading, he said quietly. Information that changes everything, but I need to come inside to explain it properly. Every instinct screamed that this was another trap, another Monroe family scheme to take what little I had left. But Bennett Crawford's eyes weren't cruel like Preston's or cold like Cordelia's. They were warm, almost gentle, and they looked at me like I was a person who mattered. I let him in. Bennett stood in my empty living room, and his expression flickered with what looked like genuine pain. He glanced toward where the children slept, then back at me. I'm sorry it took me this long to reach you, he said. I've been building a case, gathering evidence, making sure everything was airtight before I made contact. Your husband hired me independently of his family's legal team 8 months before he died. He was concerned about certain irregularities in the family trust structure. What kind of irregularities? The kind where family members systematically steal from each other while maintaining a veneer of respectability. Bennett's voice was tight with controlled fury. Julian suspected his mother and brother were planning something. He didn't know exactly what, but he felt the walls closing in. So he hired me to protect you and the children. He pulled an envelope from his briefcase. The paper was expensive, cream-colored, with my name written across the front in Julian's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I reached for it. Your husband left specific instructions, Bennett continued. I was to wait until after the family will reading, let them show their hand completely, gather documented proof of their intentions. Then I was to find you and give you this. The envelope felt heavier than it should, weighted with secrets that had been buried for months. Why? I whispered. Why would Julian do all this in secret? Why wouldn't he just tell me? Because he was protecting you. If you'd known what he suspected, you might have confronted his family. They might have accelerated their timeline. He needed you to be genuinely surprised by the will reading, genuinely devastated, so they'd think they'd won. I stared at this stranger who spoke my dead husband's name with such reverence, who claimed to know things about Julian's final months that I didn't. What's in the envelope? Your future, Bennett said simply. Everything Julian built to keep you safe. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of Julian's personal stationery, his familiar handwriting stark against the cream paper, the same careful script that had written me love notes during our courtship, the same hand that had signed the twins' bedtime stories. My dearest Kali, if you're reading this, then my family has shown you exactly who they are. I'm sorry you had to endure their cruelty, but it was necessary for you to understand the stakes. They needed to reveal their true nature before you could see how deep their corruption runs. The will reading you just sat through was a complete fabrication. Garrett Morrison has been on my mother's payroll for over 20 years. Everything he told you was a lie designed to break you, to make you desperate. Enough to give up custody of our children in exchange for basic survival. But here's what they don't know. Here's what I've been building while they thought they were manipulating me. 2 years ago, I started moving my personal assets out of the family trust structure, quietly, carefully, into accounts and investments they can't touch. I'm worth approximately $8 million in assets completely separate from the Monroe family holdings. All of it belongs to you and the children. Bennett has all the documentation. Bank accounts, investment portfolios, property deeds, everything you need to not just survive, but to fight back. And Kali, my love, there's one more thing. Something I've been building for you that I'd planned to reveal on our 10th anniversary. A surprise I won't get to see your face when you discover it. Bennett will show you. I love you. I have loved you from the moment you recommended meatloaf with that tired smile and kind eyes. I will love you past death, past whatever comes after, into whatever eternity exists. Protect our children. Be the warrior I know you are. And someday, when you're ready, let yourself love again. Not to replace me, but because you deserve every happiness this world can offer. Forever yours, Julian. P.S. Tell the twins their daddy's greatest treasure wasn't money. It was watching them grow into the beautiful souls they're becoming. I read the letter 3 times before the words made sense. Before my brain could process what Julian was telling me. $8 million. The Monroe family had left me with 0, thinking they'd destroyed me, thinking they'd won. And all along, Julian had been building me a fortress they couldn't breach. Bennett stood quietly, giving me space to absorb the revelation. When I finally looked up, my face wet with tears I didn't remember shedding, he was watching me with an expression of profound sadness and determination. Why didn't you stop them? I asked, my voice raw. At the will reading, why didn't you stand up and tell them they were lying? Because I needed them to commit their crimes completely, needed documented proof of their fraud, their conspiracy to deprive you of your legal inheritance. Bennett pulled out a tablet, showing me screens full of financial data. If I'd stopped them at the will reading, they could have claimed it was a simple mistake, an accounting error. But by letting them proceed, by recording their statements, by gathering evidence of their intentions, I built a case they can't defend against. The tablet showed bank statements with Julian's name, account after account, each containing funds I'd had no idea existed, investment portfolios that had been carefully managed and grown, property deeds for places I'd never heard of. Your husband was methodical, Bennett continued. He documented every conversation with his family about you and the children, every attempt they made to pressure him into leaving you, every threat about cutting him off from the family fortune. He recorded phone calls, saved emails, built a paper trail of their corruption that goes back years. I stared at the numbers scrolling past. Numbers so large they lost meaning. This was Julian's love made tangible, his protection extending past death. There's more, Bennett said quietly. Something Julian was very specific about showing you in person. Something he built with his own hands over the past 2 years. What do you mean? Julian purchased a property about an hour outside the city, completely off the Monroe family radar, registered to a shell company they'll never trace. He's been having it developed according to very specific plans. He wanted to surprise you with it on your 10th anniversary, but he died. Yes, Bennett's expression softened. He died before he could show you what he built. But it's ready now. It's been waiting for you and the children. If you'll let me, I'd like to drive you there tomorrow. Tomorrow. I looked around the empty room, at the sleeping bags where my children dreamed. Tomorrow we're supposed to move into a motel for a week before I figure out where we're going next. Mrs. Monroe, you own a home. A beautiful home that Julian designed specifically for your family. You don't need a motel. You don't need to figure anything out except whether you want me to come, pick you up at 9 in the morning, or if you'd prefer a different time. The shift was too sudden, too dramatic. 4 hours ago, I'd been left with $0 and 30 days to vacate. Now I was being told I was a multimillionaire with a secret house waiting for me. This is real? I whispered. This isn't some Monroe family trick to what? Take more from you? Bennett's voice carried an edge I hadn't heard before. Mrs. Monroe, I'm going to be very direct with you. Your husband hired me because I have a reputation for protecting people from powerful families who think money makes them untouchable. I spent 7 years as a federal prosecutor before going into private practice. I don't work for people like the Monroes. I work against them. Why? His expression shifted, revealing something raw underneath the professional exterior. Because 7 years ago, I lost my wife to cancer. Simone was pregnant with our daughter when she got diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors said treatment might save her but would definitely kill the baby. She chose to have Ruby instead of saving herself. I'm so sorry, I breathed. Before Simone died, she made me promise something. She made me swear that I'd use my skills to protect people who love as fiercely as we did. People who choose family over everything else, who build lives based on love instead of obligation or expectation. Bennett's voice was rough with emotion. Your husband loved you and those children with everything he had. He spent his final months building walls to protect you from people who wanted to destroy what you'd built together. I won't let his family win. I won't let them take what he died trying to preserve. The confession hung in the air between us. Two people who'd lost everything, connected by grief and the determination to honor the dead by protecting the living. Okay, I said finally. 9 o'clock tomorrow. Show me what Julian built. Bennett's smile was small but genuine. He handed me a business card with his personal cell phone number. Call me if you need anything before then. Anything at all. You're not alone in this anymore, Mrs. Monroe. After he left, I sat in that empty room with Julian's letter pressed against my chest and let myself cry. Not from despair this time, but from overwhelming gratitude and grief tangled together until I couldn't tell them apart. Julian had known, had understood his family well enough to predict exactly what they'd do, had loved me enough to spend his final months building protection I hadn't known I needed. I went to check on the children, both sleeping peacefully in their borrowed bags. Amara had her thumb in her mouth. Elijah's arm was thrown protectively over his sister even in sleep. Your daddy loved you, I whispered, kneeling between them. He loved you so much that he built you a castle to keep you safe. And tomorrow we're going to go see what love looks like when it refuses to die." I barely slept that night. Kept pulling out Julian's letter and reading it again, running my fingers over his handwriting like I could touch him through the ink. Bennett Crawford arrived at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, driving a sensible black sedan. But he wasn't alone. A little girl sat in the back seat, maybe 7 years old, with her father. Has dark hair and eyes that held too much understanding for someone so young. "Ruby wanted to come," Bennett explained as I loaded our few remaining possessions into his trunk. "She's been excited to meet you." The little girl looked up from a book about astronomy and offered me a smile that was pure sunshine. "Daddy says your husband was really smart and loved you a lot, like how Daddy loved my mama." My heart cracked and mended simultaneously. "He did, sweetheart. He really did." Amara and Elijah climbed into the back seat with Ruby, and within minutes the 3 children were talking like old friends. Ruby was explaining stellar classifications while Elijah listened with rapt attention, and Amara asked questions about whether stars could be purple. "Your daughter is extraordinary," I said quietly to Bennett as we pulled away from the house that was no longer mine. "She's my world," he replied. "After Simone died, Ruby became my reason to keep breathing. She reminds me every day that love doesn't end just because someone's gone. It transforms into something new." We drove out of the city into countryside I'd only seen in magazines. Horse farms and vineyards rolled past the windows. The late morning sun turned everything golden. Amara pressed her face against the glass, pointing out cows and horses with 6-year-old delight. "How long were you married?" I asked Bennett. "To Simone? We weren't, actually." He smiled at the memory. "We'd been together since we were 15. High school sweethearts who everyone knew would end up married. We were planning the wedding when she got diagnosed. She was 3 months pregnant with Ruby. The doctors said chemotherapy might give her a few more years, but it would terminate the pregnancy. She chose Ruby. She chose to give me the greatest gift of my life." Bennett's voice was thick with emotion. "Simone lived long enough to hold our daughter for 3 hours. Long enough to name her. Long enough to make me promise I'd tell Ruby every day how much her mother loved her. Then she was gone. I'm so sorry." "Don't be. Simone gave me Ruby, and Ruby gave me a reason to become someone who fights for people like you. Someone who makes sure that love doesn't get destroyed by greed and cruelty." Bennett glanced at me. "Your husband and I had long conversations about love and loss, about what it means to protect the people who matter. He understood that loving you meant preparing for the worst while hoping for the best." The estate appeared around a bend in the road like something from a dream. Not a mansion. Not the ostentatious displays of wealth the Monroe family preferred. This was a home, a beautiful craftsman-style house with wide porches and matured trees creating a canopy of green. Gardens burst with late spring color. A tire swing hung from an ancient oak tree that must have been centuries old. "Welcome home," Bennett said quietly. I stepped from the car and felt something shift in my chest. Julian had built this, had imagined me here, had planned our future in these rooms and gardens. "There's a tree house." Elijah's voice carried pure joy as he ran toward the oak with Ruby close behind. "And flower gardens," Amara called, discovering roses and lavender and daisies planted with obvious care. Bennett led me inside, and every room took my breath away. The kitchen had a reading nook by the window, exactly like the one Julian had promised but never built in our old house. Built-in bench seating with cushions in my favorite shade of blue. Bookshelves already filled with novels I loved. The master bedroom had an entire wall of built-in shelves containing every book I'd ever mentioned wanting to read. A window seat looked out over the gardens. The bed was positioned to catch morning light. The children's rooms were painted in colors I recognized immediately. Amara's in the soft purple she'd announced was her favorite last year. Elijah's in deep blue with glow-in-the-dark stars, already positioned on the ceiling in actual constellation patterns. Julian had been listening to every offhand comment, every casual mention of preferences, had been building this place with love and attention to details I'd thought he'd forgotten. "How?" I whispered, standing in Amara's room with tears streaming down my face. "How did he know all of this?" "Because he paid attention," Bennett replied gently. "Every conversation you had, every dream you mentioned, every small preference you expressed. He wrote it all down. I have notebooks full of his notes about what you and the children loved. He wanted this place to feel like home the moment you walked in." "There's one more thing," Bennett said, leading me to a study I hadn't noticed. Julian's study, now mine, now ours. The room was lined with bookshelves and warm wood. A desk sat by the window, positioned to look out at the gardens. And on that desk sat a laptop and a sealed envelope with my name in Julian's handwriting. "Go ahead," Bennett encouraged. "He wanted you to read this here." My hands shook as I opened the second letter. "My beloved Callie, if you're reading this, Bennett brought you to our home, the place I built for us to grow old together. I'm sorry I won't be there to see your face when you discover all the small touches I included. The reading nook, because you always wanted a cozy place to drink coffee and watch the world. The garden, because you said you'd love to grow flowers someday. The treehouse, because Elijah asked for one, and I wanted him to have adventures. The purple room, because Amara changes her favorite color weekly, but always comes back to purple. This house is yours. These accounts are yours. Everything I built for you and our babies. But more than the house and the money, I'm leaving you evidence. Documentation of everything my family has done. Their manipulation, their fraud, their systematic attempts to undermine our marriage. Bennett has it all organized, ready to use if you choose to fight back. And Callie, my love, I hope you do fight back. I hope you show them that you're not the helpless waitress they think they can destroy. I hope you prove that love is stronger than money, that truth prevails over lies, that eventually everyone answers for their choices. Be fierce. Be the warrior I always knew you were. Protect our children from the poison my family represents. And someday, when you're ready, let yourself love again, not to replace me. No one could replace what we had. But because you deserve to be happy. You deserve to build a new life. You deserve every beautiful thing this world can offer. I will love you forever, Callie Washington Monroe. You were the adventure of my lifetime. You gave me children who are the best of both of us. You gave me a reason to be brave enough to choose my own path. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for our family. Thank you for being you. Forever and always, Julian. P.S. The laptop has videos I recorded for you and the kids. For birthdays and graduations and weddings. For moments I knew I might miss. Make sure Elijah knows how proud I am of his curiosity. Make sure Amara knows her creativity is a gift. And make sure you know that loving you was the greatest privilege of my life. I collapsed into the desk chair and sobbed. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my soul. Grief and gratitude and love all tangled together. Bennett stepped back, giving me privacy, but not so far that I felt alone. His presence was a quiet comfort, a steady assurance that I didn't have to face what came next without support. When I finally composed myself enough to speak, I asked, "What happens now?" "Now," Bennett said, his voice carrying steel underneath the gentleness, "we make the Monroe family answer for what they've done. If you want to, that is. This is your choice, Mrs. Monroe. You have the resources to disappear, to build a quiet life here with your children, where they can never touch you again. Or you can fight. You can use the evidence Julian gathered to destroy them the way they tried to destroy you." I thought of Cordelia's cold eyes, Preston's cruel laughter, the way they'd looked at my children like obstacles to be removed. I thought of Julian spending his final months building me weapons instead of enjoying the time he had left with his family. I thought of Elijah asking why his grandmother hated them, of Amara crying because her daddy was gone, of 4 months of hell where I'd believed I was worthless, powerless, alone. "I want to fight," I said quietly. "I want them to answer for what they did, for what they tried to do to my children." Bennett's smile was sharp as winter wind. "Then let's show the Monroe family what happens when they underestimate a mother's love." The first night in the estate felt surreal, like I'd stepped through a doorway into someone else's life, a life where mothers didn't cry themselves to sleep wondering how to feed their children, a life where safety wasn't a luxury, but a given. Bennett had left us with groceries he'd stocked in the refrigerator, basics to get us through the first few days. Amara and Elijah ran through the house like it was Christmas morning, discovering new rooms and hidden nooks and the kind of space children should have to grow. "Mama, look," Elijah called from upstairs. "My room has a telescope already set up, and there's a note from Daddy." I found him standing by the window, holding a small card in Julian's handwriting. The telescope was positioned perfectly to view the night sky, professional-grade equipment that must have cost thousands. "Dear Elijah," the note read, "by the time you find this, I might not be around to show you the stars myself, but I want you to keep looking up, buddy. Keep asking questions. Keep being curious about how the universe works. You're going to do amazing things someday. Love, Dad. Elijah pressed the note to his chest, his young face struggling with emotions too big for an 8-year-old body. He knew, my son whispered. Daddy knew he might not be here. I pulled him close, this boy who'd grown up too fast. He loved you enough to make sure you'd have everything you needed even if he was gone. In Amara's room, we found a similar note tucked into the bookshelf. My sweet Amara, it began. Keep drawing your gardens and your fairies and all the beautiful things your imagination creates. The world needs more beauty, and you have a gift for seeing magic everywhere. Don't ever lose that. Love, Daddy. Amara clutched the note and climbed into my lap, something she hadn't done in weeks. Will we really get to stay here forever? Yes, baby. This is our home now. Daddy made sure of it. That night, after the children finally fell asleep in their new beds, I sat in Julian's study and opened the laptop he'd left me. The desktop had a folder labeled for Kali and the kids. Inside were dozens of video files, each one carefully labeled. Amara's 7th birthday. Elijah's 9th birthday. Amara's first day of high school. Elijah's high school graduation. Amara's wedding day. Elijah's wedding day. For Kali on hard days, Julian had recorded messages for milestones he knew he might miss, had sat in this study, knowing he might die, and created a library of love that would extend past his death. I clicked on for Kali on hard days. Julian's face filled the screen. He looked tired, older than I remembered. This must have been recorded in those final months when he'd been so preoccupied. Hey, love, he said to the camera. If you're watching this, you're probably having a rough time. Maybe the kids are driving you crazy. Maybe you're missing me so much it hurts. Maybe my family has shown you just how cruel they can be. I want you to know something. You are the strongest person I've ever met. Stronger than you realize. You survived a childhood that would have broken most people. You built a life from nothing. You loved me despite every reason my family gave you not to. Whatever you're facing right now, you can handle it. You can survive it. You can come out the other side even stronger than before. And Kali, if something happens to me, if I'm not there to fight beside you, I need you to be fierce. Don't let my family destroy what we built. Don't let them make you believe you're anything less than extraordinary. Use the resources I've left you. Trust Bennett completely. He's a good man who understands loss and love and the importance of protecting what matters. And maybe, someday, let yourself be happy again. Let yourself love again. You deserve that, Kali. You deserve every beautiful thing this world can offer. I love you. Past death, past time, past everything. You were my greatest adventure. The video ended. I sat in that study, in the house my dead husband had built, and felt his love surrounding me like armor. Julian had given me more than money and property. He'd given me permission to survive, permission to fight, permission to eventually move forward. I wasn't ready for that last part yet. But the fighting? That I could do. Bennett returned the next morning with Ruby and a briefcase full of documents. The little girl immediately disappeared with Amara and Elijah to explore the grounds while Bennett spread paperwork across the kitchen table. This is everything Julian documented over the past 2 years, he explained. Recordings of family meetings where they discussed forcing him out of the company. Emails between Cordelia and Preston planning how to handle the gold digger problem. Financial records showing they'd been systematically draining his accounts. How did he get all this without them knowing? Julian was smarter than his family gave him credit for. Bennett pulled up audio files on his laptop. He installed recording devices in his mother's study, in Preston's office, even in his own phone. Everything was legal, obtained on property he owned or with his consent as a party to the conversations. Admissible in court. He pressed play on one file. Cordelia's voice filled the kitchen, cold and calculating. The problem is the wife and those children. If Richard dies before we can force an annulment, she'll be entitled to his estate. We need to move quickly. Preston's voice responded. What are you suggesting, Mother? I'm suggesting that Richard has been under significant stress lately. Stress can cause all sorts of health problems. Heart conditions run in families, you know. Very tragic when someone so young suffers a cardiac event. My blood turned to ice. Are they saying what I think they're saying? Bennett's face was grim. Julian died of a heart attack. The official cause was acute myocardial infarction brought on by stress and genetic predisposition. But this recording was made 3 months before his death. They were planning it, planning to kill him. We can't prove that, not definitively, but we can prove conspiracy to defraud you of your inheritance. We can prove they falsified the will reading. We can prove they've been engaged in financial crimes for years, and we can make sure they never have access to your children. What do? We file a civil lawsuit. Fraud, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress. We depose every member of the family under oath. We force them to answer questions they've been avoiding for decades. And we make them pay, both financially and reputationally. Bennett pulled out a draft complaint, pages of legal language that detailed the Monroe family's crimes. Reading it felt like watching my life become a case study in cruelty. How long will this take? Months, possibly a year or more. Civil litigation moves slowly, and the Monroe family will throw every obstacle they can in our path. They'll try to bury us in motions and continuances. They'll hire the most expensive attorneys money can buy. And you think we can win? Bennett looked at me with absolute certainty. Mrs. Monroe, I've spent the last 8 months preparing for this fight. I have evidence that would make a law school professor weep with joy. Yes, we can win. The question is whether you're ready for what it's going to cost emotionally. What do you mean? They're going to attack you, your character, your marriage, your fitness as a mother. They're going to dig up every mistake you've ever made in present. It is proof that you're exactly what they've always said you were. I thought of sitting in that conference room while they laughed at my pain. Thought of Cordelia's casual cruelty toward my children. Thought of Julian spending his final months building weapons for a war he knew was coming. Let them try, I said quietly. Let them throw everything they have at me. I'm still going to be standing when this is over. Bennett smiled. Then let's show them what a mother's love looks like when it stops being polite and starts being tactical. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning because Tuesdays had become significant in my life for reasons both beautiful and terrible. By Tuesday afternoon, the media had picked up the story. Wealthy family accused of defrauding widow and children, the headlines read. Monroe dynasty faces fraud allegations. Attorney claims systematic conspiracy to steal inheritance. My phone, which I'd barely used in months, started ringing constantly. Reporters wanting comments. Old friends I hadn't heard from in years suddenly concerned about my well-being. Strangers offering support or criticism in equal measure. Bennett had warned me this would happen. Don't talk to anyone, he'd instructed. Not reporters, not friends, not family. Everything you say can and will be used against you. Let me handle the media. And he did. Bennett gave a press conference outside the courthouse, his voice carrying authority and controlled anger. The Monroe family portrayed themselves as pillars of the community, he told the assembled reporters. But behind closed doors, they engaged in a systematic campaign to destroy a grieving widow and steal from their own grandchildren. We have documented evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and financial crimes spanning years. This case is about justice for a family that was targeted simply because they dared to love someone the Monroes considered beneath them. The Monroe family's response was predictably vicious. Their attorneys released a statement painting me as a gold digger who'd manipulated their beloved son. They claimed Julian had been having second thoughts about our marriage before his death. They suggested I was an unfit mother who'd neglected my children while spending my husband's money. It was all lies, but lies told with enough confidence that some people believed them. Cordelia gave an interview to a sympathetic society reporter, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. I'm terribly concerned about my grandchildren, she said. Being raised by someone so clearly unstable, so obviously motivated by greed rather than genuine love. We only want what's best for those poor babies. Watching that interview felt like being stabbed. This woman who'd ignored her grandchildren for 4 months, who'd called, them breeding with the help, was now performing concern for the cameras. Bennett appeared at the estate that evening with Takeout and Ruby. He found me in the kitchen, staring at my laptop screen where Cordelia's interview played on repeat. Turn it off, he said gently. Don't give her that power. She's lying. Telling everyone I'm a terrible mother, that I never loved Julian, that I'm just after money I didn't even know existed until 3 days ago. I know. And in a few months, we're going to prove every word she said was a lie. He closed my laptop firmly. But right now, you need to take care of yourself and your kids. Let me worry about Cordelia. Outside, we could hear the children playing. Ruby was teaching Amara about constellations, while Elijah asked questions with his characteristic intensity. Normal children sounds in an increasingly abnormal situation. How do you do this? I asked Bennett. How do you stay so calm when everything feels like it's falling apart? Because I've been where you are. Bennett's voice softened. After Simone died, I felt like I was drowning. Every day was just surviving until I could collapse into bed and escape into sleep. Ruby was 6 months old, and I had no idea how to be a single father to a baby who'd never know her mother. What changed? Time. And the realization that the best way to honor Simone was to become someone she'd be proud of. Someone who fought for people who needed fighting for. Someone who made sure love didn't get destroyed by greed and cruelty. He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something in his eyes that made my breath catch. Your husband and I had long conversations in those final months about love and loss and what it means to protect the people who matter. He told me about you, about how you made him believe he could choose his own path instead of following his family's expectations. What else did he say? That if anything happened to him, he hoped you'd find someone who could see how extraordinary you are. Someone who'd fight beside you instead of trying to control you. Bennett's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Someone who'd love you for exactly who you are. The moment stretched between us, heavy with possibility and complication. Bennett, I started, but he shook his head. I'm your attorney. You're my client and my friend's widow. This is completely inappropriate, and I'm sorry for even suggesting. He stood abruptly, clearly flustered in a way I'd never seen him before. I caught his hand. Bennett, wait. He froze, looking down at where my fingers wrapped around his. You're right that this is complicated. I'm still grieving Julian. You're my attorney. There are ethical considerations and timing issues, and about 1,000 reasons this is a terrible idea. So we should, he began. But, I interrupted, Julian's last words to me were about letting myself love again someday. And you remind me that good men exist, that not everyone wants to change me or fix me or own me. Callie, I'm not saying I'm ready for anything right now. I'm not. But maybe, after this legal case is over, after we've had time to just be friends, maybe we could see what happens when two people who've lost everything decide they might be willing to find something new. Bennett's smile was sunrise after a long night. I can work with maybe. He left soon after, but not before I'd kissed his cheek. A promise of possibilities, a bridge between grief and hope. That night, I stood in Julian's study and felt his presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. Thank you, I whispered to the man who'd loved me enough to protect me past death. Thank you for Bennett. Thank you for this home. Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't end, it transforms. The moonlight through the window seemed to glow a little brighter, and I let myself believe that wherever Julian was, he was smiling. The next 2 months were a blur of depositions, document production, and legal maneuvering. Bennett was relentless, pulling together a case so airtight that even the Monroe family's expensive legal team struggled to find weak points. The children settled into their new life with the resilience kids somehow possess. Amara started at a new school and made friends who invited her to birthday parties and playdates. Elijah joined a science club and started entering competitions that made his face light up with joy. Ruby became a fixture at our house, and the 3 children formed a bond that felt like siblings. They did homework together, played in the gardens, and created elaborate games involving fairies and space explorers and heroic quests. Watching them, I realized this was what family could look like. Not blood obligation, but chosen connection. Not performance for the sake of appearances, but genuine love and acceptance. Bennett was careful to maintain professional boundaries, but I caught him looking at me when he thought I wasn't watching. Caught myself doing the same thing, noticing the way he listened when I talked, the way he treated my children with genuine affection, the way he saw me as a whole person instead of just a case file. One evening, about 6 weeks into the legal process, we sat on the porch swing after the children had gone to bed. Fireflies danced across the lawn. The evening air smelled like the lavender Amara had been tending in her garden. The preliminary hearing is next week, Bennett said quietly. Judge Catherine DeLuca is presiding. She's got a reputation for despising wealth-based privilege and taking no nonsense from entitled defendants. That's good, right? That's very good. If we can get past the motion to dismiss, we move to discovery and depositions. That's when things get interesting. Interesting how? Interesting like watching the Monroe family squirm under oath when they have to answer questions they've been avoiding for decades. Bennett's smile was sharp. Preston in particular is going to have a very bad time. I should feel more excited about that. Vindictive, maybe. But mostly I just feel tired. That's normal. Bennett shifted to look at me directly. You've been running on adrenaline and righteous anger for weeks. Eventually, your body demands rest. How do you know? Because I went through the same thing after Simone died. There was a period where I was fueled entirely by grief and the need to honor her memory. Then one day I woke up and couldn't get out of bed. Just completely depleted. What did you do? Ruby crawled into bed with me and said, "Daddy, Mama would want us to have pancakes." So we got up and made pancakes. And the next day we made waffles. And eventually, we built a life that had room for both grief and joy. He took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "You're going to get through this, Callie. You're going to win this case and raise your children and build a life that honors Julian while also being fully yours. And you don't have to do it alone." The way he looked at me made my heart do complicated things. Made me think about futures I wasn't ready to imagine. Made me wonder what it would feel like to be loved by someone who saw all my broken pieces and didn't want to fix them, just hold them gently. "Bennett," I whispered, "I need to tell you something. Okay, I'm starting to feel things I shouldn't feel. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. But when you show up with cookies Ruby definitely helped make, and when you let Elijah talk about rockets for 3 hours straight, and when you defend me like I'm worth defending, I start to think that maybe Julian was right about letting myself love again." Bennett's breath caught. "Callie, I'm not ready," I continued quickly. "I need to finish grieving. I need to see this legal case through. I need to just be for a while without the pressure of anyone's expectations. I understand. But I wanted you to know that when I am ready, if you're still interested, I'd like to explore what this could be." He brought my hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles that felt like a vow. "I'll wait as long as you need. Months, years, whatever it takes. Because you're worth waiting for, Callie Monroe." Hey everyone, I need to pause here for a second. If this story is hitting you right in the heart, if you're rooting for Callie and Bennett, I need you to hit that like button right now. Let me know you're feeling this journey with me. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, or just say I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline. Your engagement means everything. It tells YouTube to share this story with more people who need to hear it. We're about to get to the trial, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Stay with me. The preliminary hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in Judge Catherine DeLuca's courtroom, a space that felt designed to intimidate, all dark wood and high ceilings and the seal of justice watching from above. The Monroe family arrived in force. Cordelia, in another Chanel suit, Preston looking smug in custom tailoring, and a legion of attorneys led by Martin Blackwood, supposedly the best defense lawyer money could buy. I sat at the plaintiff's table in a simple navy dress, Bennett beside me radiating quiet confidence. Judge DeLuca entered, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked over the assembled parties with obvious distaste for the circus this case had become. "I've reviewed the complaint and the motion to dismiss," she began without preamble. "Mr. Blackwood, you have 60 seconds to convince me why this case shouldn't proceed to trial." Martin Blackwood stood, all polished charm and expensive cologne. "Your Honor, this is clearly a case of a gold digger attempting to extort money from a grieving family. The plaintiff has no evidence of fraud, merely unsupported allegations designed to embarrass." "I have recordings," Bennett interrupted, standing smoothly. "Audio and video evidence of the defendants discussing plans to defraud Mrs. Monroe. Financial documents showing systematic theft from Julian Monroe's accounts. Testimony from witnesses who can corroborate every allegation in our complaint." Judge DeLuca leaned forward. "You have recordings of the defendants discussing fraud?" "Extensive recordings, Your Honor, including conversations where Mrs. Cordelia Monroe and Mr. Preston Monroe explicitly discuss how to handle what they called the gold digger problem after Julian Monroe's death." The courtroom went silent. Even Martin Blackwood looked rattled. "I'd like to hear a sample," Judge DeLuca said. Bennett played the audio file. Cordelia's voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating. "The problem is the wife and those children. If Richard dies before we can force an annulment, she'll be entitled to his estate." Preston's response, "What are you suggesting, Mother?" Cordelia again, "I'm suggesting that Richard has been under significant stress lately. Stress can cause all sorts of health problems." Judge DeLuca's expression went from neutral to furious. "When was this recorded?" 3 months before Julian Monroe died of a sudden heart attack, Your Honor." Bennett's voice was calm, but his words were devastating. The judge looked at the Monroe family with open disgust. "Your Honor." Martin Blackwood tried to recover. "This recording is taken out of context." "The context," Bennett interrupted, is a family conspiring to deprive a widow and her children of their legal inheritance. The context is systematic fraud, elder abuse, and quite possibly conspiracy to commit murder, though that would be a matter for criminal prosecutors. Cordelia had gone pale. Preston was whispering frantically to his attorneys. "Motion to dismiss denied," Judge DeLuca announced. "Furthermore, I'm ordering expedited discovery and setting a trial date for 3 months from now." She looked directly at Cordelia. "Mrs. Monroe, if even half of what's alleged here is true, you should be ashamed of yourself. These are your grandchildren you've tried to harm." "Your Honor, we would like to request," Martin Blackwood began, but the judge cut him off. "You can request all you want, Mr. Blackwood, but this case is moving forward, and it's moving forward quickly. I don't like wealthy families using the legal system as a weapon against grieving widows." She banged her gavel. "We're adjourned. Mr. Crawford, I'll see you in chambers to discuss the discovery schedule." Walking out of that courtroom felt like floating. Bennett's hand found the small of my back, steadying me as reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Monroe, do you believe your husband was murdered? How do you respond to allegations that you married for money? What do you want people to know about the Monroe family?" Bennett shielded me from the cameras, guiding me to his car with practiced efficiency. Once we were safely inside, I finally allowed myself to react. "We won." My voice came out shaky with disbelief. "She's actually going to let us go to trial. She's going to do more than that." Bennett was grinning, genuinely delighted. "Judge DeLuca just sent a message to the Monroe family that their money doesn't buy them immunity. 3 months is lightning speed for a case this complex. She wants this resolved quickly and fairly." What happens now? Now we prepare for war. Discovery, depositions, witness interviews. We build a case so solid that the Monroe family has no choice but to settle or face complete destruction in court. Over the next weeks, Bennett deposed every member of the Monroe family. I watched via video feed as Preston squirmed under questioning as Cordelia's lawyers objected constantly as the family's carefully constructed facade crumbled under oath. The evidence was devastating. Bank records showing Preston had been systematically transferring money from Julian's accounts. Emails between Cordelia and the family attorney Garrett Morrison planning the falsified will reading. Testimony from employees who'd witnessed the family's cruelty toward Julian whenever he mentioned me or the children. Garrett Morrison took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against the Monroes in exchange for reduced charges. His deposition was brutal. Mrs. Monroe instructed me to create a will that left everything to the family and nothing to Julian's wife and children, he testified. She said it needed to look legitimate, but that we'd handle any challenges through our connections in the court system. "And you agreed to this?" Bennett asked. I was being paid very well to ensure the Monroe family's interests were protected, even when those interests included defrauding a widow and orphaning children. Garrett looked down. "I'm not proud of it, but yes." Life at the estate settled into a new rhythm. The children thrived in their schools. Amara joined a dance company and discovered she loved performing. Elijah won a regional science fair with a project about sustainable energy that made Bennett tear up with pride. Because Bennett had become part of our family. Not officially, not romantically, but as a constant presence. Sunday dinners where he and Ruby joined us. Homework sessions where he patiently explained algebra to Elijah. Garden parties where Amara made him wear fairy wings and serve imaginary tea. One Saturday afternoon, about 2 months before the trial, I found Bennett in the garden helping Elijah build a telescope mount. Ruby and Amara were nearby, arguing good-naturedly about whether purple or blue was the superior color. "This is nice," I said, settling onto the grass beside them. "Just this quiet." Bennett looked up, wood shavings in his hair and a smile on his face. "This is everything," he corrected gently. Later, after Ruby and Bennett had gone home and the children were in bed, I opened my laptop to Julian's video folder. I'd been working through them slowly, savoring each message like a gift. Tonight, I clicked on for Kali when she's ready to move forward. Julian's face appeared, and my heart clenched with love and grief in equal measure. "Hey, love," he began. "If you're watching this, enough time has passed that you're thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present. I'm glad. I never wanted you to spend your life mourning me. I hope you've found someone who makes you happy, someone who sees how extraordinary you are, someone who loves our kids and treats them with kindness, someone who fights for you instead of trying to control you. I hope it's Bennett, actually. I know that's weird to say, but we had a lot of conversations about love and loss. He's a good man who understands grief. Who knows what it's like to lose someone and have to rebuild. Who won't try to replace me, but will make space for his own place in your heart. If it's not Bennett, that's okay too. Whoever it is, I hope they make you laugh. I hope they hold you on hard days. I hope they build a life with you that honors what we had while also being completely new. You deserve to be happy, Callie. You deserve to be loved fiercely and without condition. You deserve every beautiful thing this world can offer. And when you're ready, when you've grieved enough and healed enough and survived enough, I want you to choose joy. Choose love. Choose to build something beautiful from the ashes. I'll always love you, but I also want you to love again. Be happy, my Callie. That's all I ever wanted for you. The video ended. I sat in Julian's study, in the house he'd built, and felt his blessing like a weight lifting from my chest. He'd known, had understood that loving me meant setting me free to find happiness beyond our marriage. Had even guessed it might be Bennett, this good man who'd entered our lives carrying protection and understanding in equal measure. I pulled out my phone and texted Bennett. Thank you for waiting. I think I'm almost ready. His response came immediately. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. The trial began on a Tuesday in early September. The courtroom was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and members of the Monroe family who'd come to watch Cordelia and Preston's downfall. I sat at the plaintiff's table wearing a simple black dress and Julian's grandmother's ring. The ring Cordelia had tried to take back after the wedding, claiming it belonged to the family. The ring Julian had refused to surrender because it had been given in love, not obligation. Bennett stood for opening arguments, and his voice carried across the courtroom with quiet authority. This case is about a family that chose cruelty over compassion, greed over love, and lies over truth. The evidence will show that Cordelia Monroe and Preston Monroe engaged in a systematic campaign to defraud Khalida Monroe and her children of their rightful inheritance. They falsified documents, corrupted legal proceedings, and attempted to steal millions of dollars that belonged to a grieving widow and 2 orphan children. He walked the jury through the evidence, the recordings, the financial documents, the testimony from witnesses who'd watched the Monroe family's crimes unfold. The defense will try to paint Mrs. Monroe as a gold digger who manipulated their beloved family member, but the evidence will show that she was a devoted wife and mother who was targeted, simply because she dared to marry someone the Monroe family considered beneath them. Martin Blackwood's opening was predictably vicious. He painted me as a scheming opportunist who'd trapped Julian into marriage, suggested I'd neglected my children while spending my husband's money, implied that Julian had been having doubts about our relationship before his death. It was all lies, but lies told with enough conviction that I saw some jurors taking notes. The first week of trial was brutal. The defense called witnesses who testified about seeing me and Julian argue, about hearing him express frustration with our marriage, about noticing distance between us in those final months. Bennett dismantled each testimony on cross-examination, revealing that arguments were about Cordelia's cruelty, that Julian's frustration was with his family, not his wife, that distance came from his secret preparations to protect us. The second week, Bennett called his witnesses, neighbors who testified about Julian's devotion to his family, teachers who described how involved he'd been in the children's lives, friends who'd watched him defend me against his family's attacks for years. Then came Garrett Morrison, the family attorney who'd facilitated the fraud. His testimony was devastating. Mrs. Cordelia Monroe instructed me to create a falsified will reading, he stated under oath. She provided specific language designed to humiliate Mrs. Khalida Monroe and make her appear desperate and unworthy. Did you have any moral qualms about this? Bennett asked. Garrett looked at me, genuine remorse in his eyes. Yes, but I was being paid very well to ignore them. I'm ashamed of what I did. The defense tried to discredit him, but the paper trail was too solid. Emails, bank transfers, recorded conversations, all of it corroborating his testimony. On the 8th day, I took the stand. Bennett led me through my testimony gently. Tell us about meeting Julian. I told them about Magnolia Street Diner, about a man who looked at me like I mattered, about building a life based on love instead of obligation. I described our wedding, Cordelia, in black, refusing to smile. I talked about Julian as a father, his devotion to our children. Then Bennett asked, did you know about the $8 million in assets Julian had accumulated? No. I thought we were middle-class comfortable. I had no idea about the extent of his wealth until Mr. Crawford showed me the documentation 3 days before we filed this lawsuit. Did you marry Julian for his money? I married Julian because he made me believe I was worth loving, because he chose me every single day despite his family's disapproval, because he was the best man I'd ever known. The cross-examination was brutal. Martin Blackwood attacked everything: my background, my education, my worthiness to marry into the Monroe family. Isn't it true that you come from poverty? He asked, making poverty sound like a moral failing. I grew up with a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed, I replied. She taught me that dignity doesn't come from bank accounts, it comes from how you treat people. Isn't it true that you had significant credit card debt when you met Julian? I had student loans and medical bills from when my mother was sick. Julian helped me pay them off because that's what partners do. They support each other. Isn't it true that Julian's family never accepted you? They made it very clear I wasn't good enough for their standards. But Julian loved me anyway. That says more about him than it does about them. The courtroom was silent. Even Blackwood seemed rattled by my composure. Mrs. Monroe, he tried one final attack. Isn't it true that you and Julian argued on the phone just minutes before the accident that killed him? Yes. I fought to keep my voice steady. We argued because I was upset that his mother had once again refused to acknowledge our children. Julian was calling to tell me he was going to confront her, that he was done putting up with her cruelty. He was defending our family with his last breath. So you admit you caused the argument that distracted him and led to his death? I looked directly at Cordelia, sitting at the defense table with her cold expression. I admit that loving me cost Julian his family's approval, but I will never apologize for that, because our love gave him happiness and gave the world 2 beautiful children. What I won't forgive is how his family tried to erase us after he was gone. Bennett's redirect was simple. Do you believe you and your children deserve the inheritance Julian left you? Julian worked hard to build those assets specifically to protect us from his family's cruelty. Yes, we deserved what he left us. We deserve to be treated with basic human decency. The final week of trial focused on the financial evidence. Forensic accountants walked the jury through the complex schemes Preston had used to drain Julian's accounts. Banking experts testified about the falsified documents, everything building to an inescapable conclusion. The Monroe family had engaged in systematic fraud for years, and they'd gotten away with it because money bought silence and influence. Closing arguments were scheduled for a Friday afternoon. Bennett stood before the jury with quiet passion. This case has never been about money. It's been about justice for a family that was targeted by people who thought they were untouchable. About 2 children who lost their father and then almost lost everything else because their grandmother valued money more than blood. He reminded them of the evidence, the recordings, the documents, the testimony. Then he turned to face Cordelia and Preston directly. The defense wants you to believe that Khalida Monroe is a gold digger who manipulated their family member. But the evidence shows she was a devoted wife and mother who was systematically targeted by people who couldn't accept that their son chose love over their expectations. Julian Monroe died trying to protect his family from the cruelty you've witnessed in this courtroom. Don't let his death be in vain. Give his widow and his children the justice they deserve. Martin Blackwood's closing painted me as a manipulative opportunist, but his heart wasn't in it. The evidence was too overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. I spent those hours in a small conference room with Bennett, trying not to climb the walls with anxiety. He held my hand, his thumb tracing calming circles on my palm. Whatever happens, he said quietly, you've already won. You've shown your children that standing up to powerful people is possible. You've proven that truth matters. You've honored Julian's memory by refusing to be broken. I want them to pay, I whispered. I want Cordelia and Preston to answer for what they did. They will. Even if the verdict doesn't go our way, we've destroyed their reputation. They'll never recover from this. The jury returned with a verdict at 4:17 in the afternoon. Guilty on all counts. Fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The foreman read each verdict with satisfaction, and I watched the Monroe family crumble. Judge DeLuca set a sentencing hearing for the following week. When that day came, her judgment was swift and severe. You took advantage of a grieving widow and attempted to make your grandchildren destitute, she told Cordelia and Preston. You manipulated legal systems designed to protect the vulnerable and used them as weapons against your own family. I'm sentencing you both to the maximum penalties allowed by law. Preston got 8 years in federal prison. Cordelia got 12, accounting for her leadership role. Additionally, Judge DeLuca ordered them to pay restitution of $4.7 million, every penny they'd stolen from Julian's accounts, plus interest and punitive damages. But for me, the real victory came when Cordelia was led away in handcuffs and, finally looked at her granddaughter with something like recognition. "Amara looks like Julian," she whispered. "She has his heart too," I replied. "The one that loved fearlessly and forgave, even when forgiveness wasn't deserved." "I'm sorry," Cordelia said, and for the first time, it sounded genuine. "Tell that to your grandchildren when they're old enough to understand what you tried to do to them. Maybe they'll be more forgiving than I am." Outside the courthouse, Bennett and I stood with our children, because Ruby had become ours too, woven into our family through choice and time and the simple truth that love expands to fill the space you give it. "What now?" Bennett asked. "Now we live," I said. "We build the life Julian dreamed about. We raise our children to be fierce and kind. We love without fear. Together?" Bennett's voice carried hope and vulnerability equally. I looked at this man who'd fought beside me, who'd waited patiently while I grieved, who'd seen all my broken pieces and didn't try to fix them, just held them gently. Together, I confirmed, "If you're ready to officially be more than my attorney." "I filed the paperwork transferring your case to my partner 3 weeks ago," Bennett admitted with a smile. "I've been ready since the day you kissed my cheek and told me to go slowly." That night, we had dinner at the estate. All 5 of us around the table Julian had chosen, eating food we'd cooked together, laughing at Ruby, his astronomy jokes and Elijah's terrible puns and Amara's elaborate stories about garden fairies. After the children were in bed, Bennett and I sat on the porch swing, his arm around my shoulders, me leaning into his warmth. "Julian would like you," I said quietly. "He'd appreciate how you fought for us, how you protected his children, how you see me as more than just his widow." "I see you as the strongest person I've ever met," Bennett replied. "And I'm grateful every day that you're willing to build something new without forgetting what you had. Simone would like you being happy. She'd want Ruby to have a mother who loves her. Is that what you're offering?" Bennett's voice was careful, hopeful. "Eventually, when the time is right, when we've gone slowly enough that everyone's ready." I turned to face him. "But yes, Bennett Crawford, I'm offering you my heart. Broken and mended, grieving and hopeful, scarred and somehow still capable of love." He kissed me then, gentle and reverent, a promise of futures we'd build together. Above us, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns, and I imagined Julian and Simone somewhere, among them, smiling at the 2 people they'd loved enough to release into new happiness. 3 years later, the wedding was held at the estate on a Tuesday, because some traditions deserved to be reclaimed and rewritten, because Tuesdays had been the day Julian walked into my life, and now they'd be the day I chose to build a new one. Amara was flower girl, scattering rose petals with the serious dedication she brought to everything. 9 years old now, confident and creative, and so much like her father it made my heart ache with joy. Elijah walked me down the aisle because he'd asked to, because he was 11 and understood that giving his mother away meant gaining even more family, not losing her. Ruby was junior bridesmaid, her astronomy book tucked into her bouquet because some things never changed. Bennett waited at the altar wearing Julian's cufflinks. I'd given them to him the night before, a gift blessed by the memory of the man who'd made this possible. The ceremony was simple, intimate, surrounded by people who'd learned that family was built from choice and love rather than blood and obligation. In the front row sat an unexpected guest, Cordelia Monroe, released early for good behavior and medical necessity. Prison and age had softened her edges, taught her humility that wealth had never demanded. She'd written to me 6 months earlier, asking not for forgiveness but for a chance to know her grandchildren before she died. I'd said yes, because carrying hate was exhausting and life was too short to waste on bitterness. Our relationship would never be easy, never be what it should have been. But Cordelia was learning to see Amara and Elijah as humans rather than mistakes. And that was something. "I do," I said to Bennett, and meant it with my whole heart. "I do," he replied, and kissed me like I was his whole world. After the ceremony, after the cake and dancing and Ruby's presentation on how love could be explained through quantum entanglement, I stood in Julian's study. Now mine, now ours. I touched the letter he'd written, preserved under glass on my desk. "I did it," I whispered to the man who'd loved me enough to protect me past death. I protected them. I fought back. I loved again. I built the life we dreamed about. The evening light through the window seemed to shimmer, and I let myself believe that somewhere Julian was proud. Bennett appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and his smile soft with joy. The kids want you for the bouquet toss. Apparently, Amara has a strategic plan involving physics and trajectory. I laughed, the sound bright and genuine. Of course she does. I took my husband's hand, my second husband, my second chance, my second beautiful chapter, and walked toward the sound of children's laughter and music and all the ordinary magic of a family choosing love over fear. Outside, the estate's garden bloomed with flowers Julian had planted, and Bennett had maintained, and I had nurtured into impossible beauty. Inside, a family built from grief and hope and stubborn determination celebrated the simple truth that love persists, transforms, and ultimately conquers even the darkest opposition. And somewhere between the laughter and the music, between the past and the future, I finally fully let myself be happy. It was everything I deserved. It was everything Julian had wanted for me. It was enough. Before we close this story, I need you to understand something important. This isn't just entertainment. This is a truth about how the world works. Powerful people will always try to convince you that you're powerless. Wealthy families will always use their money and influence to protect themselves, even when it means destroying innocent people. But here's what the Monroe family learned the hard way. Love is stronger than money. Truth prevails over lies, and eventually, everyone answers for their choices. Kylie Monroe started with nothing. $0, zero support, zero family backing, just a dead husband's love and a determination to protect her children. She ended with justice, with security, with a family built from choice instead of blood. She ended with happiness she'd earned through surviving the unsurvivable. If this story moved you, if it inspired you, if it made you believe that ordinary people can defeat powerful opposition, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel. Join this community of people who believe that love persists, who believe that justice is possible, who believe in fighting back when the world tries to break you. Share this story. Someone in your life needs to hear that they're stronger than they know. Someone needs to believe they can stand up to people who think they're untouchable. Be the person who gives them hope. And comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your own story of fighting back against impossible odds. Or just say, I'm with you, Mr. Hearthline. Let me know you're part of this community. Because here's the truth that Kylie Monroe learned, and I want you to remember. Sometimes the smallest inheritance, $0, zero support, zero mercy, becomes the foundation for the greatest wealth. Not money, but strength. Not power, but resilience. Not revenge, but justice. And always, always, the stubborn, fierce, beautiful choice to love again despite every reason not to. Kylie Monroe was left with nothing and built everything. She was dismissed as worthless and proved she was priceless. She was broken by grief and rebuilt by love. Her story isn't over. She's still out there, raising children who know their worth, running a foundation that helps other families, facing powerful opposition, living a life that honors both the man she lost and the man she found. This is what victory looks like. Not perfect, not easy, but real and earned and beautiful. This is Mr. Hearthline, reminding you that you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and capable of building something beautiful from the ashes. The Monroe family thought they could erase Kylie with a $0 inheritance. Instead, they taught her exactly how powerful she'd always been. Don't let anyone make you forget your power. Until next time, keep fighting, keep loving, keep believing. I'm with you, always.